Well, hello there everybody, hope you're all keeping well, hope you're all keeping safe, and I hope you're having a fantastic day today. If you've been following along on my channel, you'll have seen I've covered a lot of videos talking about music photography, from what's the best settings to use, to how to get your first photo pass, and other tips and tricks that I've learned along the way with working within this field. And there's one topic that I haven't talked about yet that we're going to talk about in today's video, and that is, well, what's the best gear to use in music photography? And it's questions that I am asked all the time. What's the best camera to use? What's the best lenses? Well, let's just spend today's video covering what sort of gear should you use in such a tricky environment, because music photography involves a lot of fast moving subjects and it involves a lot of low light. So what exactly is going to be the best gear to work in these sort of environments? And hopefully by the end of this video, it'll give you an idea of what the best camera lens or any other bits and pieces will do to help your photography. And it can also help with other fields too. But today we're specifically talking about the music side. Of course, if you're new to the channel, hi, my name is Mark. I'm a photographer from Northern Ireland. It's greatly appreciated you come and check out this content. You have no idea how much it means to me. If you do happen to be new to the channel, head down below to check out more photography related content. You can also like, share, subscribe, and hit that wee bell icon so you can stay up to date with more videos. So let's just get right to it then, shall we? What is the best camera to use for music photography? Now, full disclaimer here, I'm going to sound like a bit of a fanboy here, because if you've been following along with my videos or you've been following my photography journey, I use Sony. So I've used Sony cameras, I use their lenses, I use Tamron lenses. So I'm probably going to be more emphasizing on Sony gear here today, but I will do my best to talk about other brands as well, like Canon and Nikon, and because not everybody uses Sony, but the terms and all will still apply to across all the different brands. Now, I can end this video very quickly right here, right now. The best camera for music photography as of September 2024 is without a doubt the Sony A9 Mark III. That is an unreal piece of equipment for this field. It's a full frame sensor, 24 megapixels with a global shutter. That means there's no banding. It'll not be affected with LED lights. It can shoot up to 120 frames per second. So if you've got a lot of moving subjects, you can just, you just spray and pray to your heart's content. I've used that camera a couple of times at gigs this year and it is unreal. There, done. End the video. Whoa, hold on 1 second now. As great as the A9 III is, not everybody has over $6 to spend, especially if this is your first camera. Plus, not everybody is a Sony user. So what should we be looking for in a camera when it comes to this field? Well, there's a couple of things that I want to talk about. First of all is the camera's sensor. If you have your camera close by to you right now, I would pick it up, take off the lens. If you have a DSLR, I would get that mirror flipped out of the way. If you have a mirrorless camera, you'll probably be able to see it right there, this rectangular piece of glass. That is your camera's sensor. That's where all the light gets recorded to. So then you have your image at the very end. That's where it all gets processed at. You probably have heard some of the terms I'm just going to mention very quickly here that all equates to the sensor type. So whether it's a micro four thirds or an APS-C or full frame, that just correlates to the sensor size. What you want with music photography is for your sensor to be as big as possible. So ideally you want to be up to full frame level. So full frame equates to 35mm in film terms. Bigger the sensor, the better it is at lower light conditions, the more light it can pick up on. Plus, if you're going into high ISOs like 3200, 6400 plus, having a big sensor means you're going to have a much more cleaner image at the end. So a 35mm sensor or a full frame is ideally what you want to have. Like for me, I use the Sony A7C Mark II, which is a full frame camera. Other brands like Canon will have the R6, the R5, Nikon will have the Z6, Z8, all those different types. You can go smaller than that if you want to and still get a good performance. Ideally you want to go no more smaller than an APS-C, so that's essentially a cropped sensor. It'll still be good in these music photography situations, like that's what I started on with the D40, the D7000s, all those different cameras from Nikon. And that's what then transitioned me into full frame. Anything from a micro four thirds like with Panasonic or Olympus to any of the 1-inch cameras will still do okay, but not amazing when you're going into those really high ISOs. You're gonna have a higher chance at getting a noisier photo compared to an APS-C, and ideally a full frame. So here's another thing that a lot of people won't tell you about sensors. As great as it is having a big sensor, you also want to make sure that that has a low resolution count. What I mean by that is we're now seeing cameras that can record up to 40, 50, 60, 100 megapixels. As great as having those higher megapixels are for printing out and blowing the big sizes and cropping in, they will pick up a lot more detail, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. And the bad reason for that is it will record a lot more noise and a lot more grain in your shot, whereas a lower resolution camera, like say for example the A7C, it's only 33 megapixels. I've had the A7 III before, it's only 24. Or like the Z6 III from Nikon or the R6 II from Canon, they're all about that sort of 20, 24 megapixels, which is more than enough, still more than enough for sharing online, but the resolution is low. So that means you're gonna have a cleaner image when it comes to a lot of noise being presented in your photos. Yes, it's great having high resolution and all, you'll still get amazing shots, but you're at a higher risk of getting more noisier shots than you are at a lower resolution camera. Like take for example the Sony A7S III, it's only 12 megapixels, but it is a low light beast. So even though you don't have as much resolution, you can bunk up your ISOs to like ridiculous numbers, like way past this border here, and get a nice clean shot. So yeah, keep an eye out on your megapixel counts, because again, if you're only sharing your photos to the internet and social media, what's the point in having 60 odd megapixels when 20, 18, 24, whatever will still be more than enough, but it means you'll also get a much more cleaner image. What you also really need to look out for with your camera is making sure that it can keep up with the subject. So having an acoustic act that's stationary, not doing much movement, you know, you're not going to worry about missing a shot there. Whereas having a heavy metal band where there's a lot of head banging, there's a lot of action going on, you want to make sure it can keep up with that. And that is a mixture of both your autofocus and your frames per second. Another thing to look out for with your camera is making sure that it can keep up with your subjects. If you have an acoustic act that's stationary, you're not going to worry about missing any action or any fast movement. Whereas if you have a heavy metal band that's doing a lot of head banging, a lot of running around, a lot of jumping, you want to make sure your camera can keep up with that, and that plays a part with both the autofocus and the frames per second. Autofocus has just reached an unreal level of performance as of late with cameras. Like take for example the Sony A7C II uses the AI chip where it has a much better subject tracking, like if it can recognize a person, but also a lot of mirrorless cameras do have the face and eye detection, so it'll just lock straight onto the face and the eye like it's doing right now with me. The same can be said with the band. It can detect a face, it can detect an eye, it can just lock on, so if they're moving about, you want to have your camera set to ASC, so continuous autofocus. If that's tracking along, you'll not miss a shot as much as what you would have done with older, slower moving cameras. And while it's good having this amazing autofocus to follow along with the subjects, you also want to make sure that you're taking a lot of photos at the one time so that you're not missing a shot. So you want to make sure that your camera has a nice big high frame rate. That's why I talked about with the A9 III, it can shoot up to 120 frames per second. Not all cameras can do that. The likes of the R6, the Z6 III, the Sony A7 range can shoot anywhere between about 10 to 12 frames per second a lot of time, which is plenty, means you have plenty of chance to spray and pray, you have a better chance of not missing a shot, whereas entry-level cameras will only shoot about 3 or 4 frames per second, so you want to make sure you have enough frames to take these faster moving subjects, so that way you don't miss out on a shot. Like, it's easy to just miss out on those finer details, like if somebody's head banging, you know, where you can get the hair in the face or not. It's amazing what you can miss out on. So all these factors come into play with your camera, whether it's your sensor size, your resolution, your autofocus, your continuous frames per second. That's what you really want to look out for when it comes to a camera. So now we've got the hard stuff out of the way, let's come to the fun stuff. Let's talk about lenses. What's the best lens to have in music photography? And you know what I'm going to talk about will apply to all fields of photography too. You ideally want to have the triforce of lenses. That is a wide angle, whether it's a prime or a zoom, like a 16 to 35, a mid-range zoom like a 24 to 70, and a telephoto like a 70 to 200. What you really want to look out for in these lenses is not so much its focal length, you want to look out for its maximum aperture. How much does this lens open up aperture wise? Like, especially if you're just starting off in photography, if you have your standard kit lens like an 18 to 55, the reason why a lens like that isn't going to do as well in low light photography is because its maximum aperture is variable. So if you zoom your lens out to 18, and if you open your aperture up to 3.5, we're going to say for this example, when you zoom in, the lens closes ever so slightly on itself. So that's why you'll find those lenses will say 3.5 to 5.6 or 6.3, whatever it is that they put on there. You ideally want that number to be constant when you're zooming in, but you also want that number to stay quite big for these low lights. F4 constant is pretty good if you have a full frame camera in dark conditions. I've gotten away with it. Ideally an F4 would be good if you're working at a festival where it's quite bright, there's a lot of light, but you want your maximum aperture to be a lot greater than that. Most mid-range zooms are going to be f2.8 max aperture wise. That's where if you zoom in and zoom out, set at f2.8, it'll remain at f2.8, so you're letting in a lot of light that way. Like, take for example, this is one lens I use for my concert photography. It's the Tamron 17 to 28 f2.8 for Sony. I absolutely love this lens because it has an f2.8 aperture all the way through, plus I have a wider angle. I love those wider angle shots where I can maybe cover the whole stage or I can cover more of the venue. I love that sort of style, but because it opens up to f2.8 and remains at f2.8 means it's going to be great for low light photography. Plus as well, a lens like this, its autofocus is fantastic. It is so sharp. I get amazing results every time. I absolutely love this lens. You can look at third parties like Tamron. This is only about £800, whereas the Sony version is about £2,000. But what you can also do to save yourself a bit of money and also gain more is go to prime lenses. Now, what you're doing there is you're taking away the zoom, you're at a fixed focal length, but you can go even wider than something like this. You can go to 14, you can go to 12mm, you can even go much more closer, like a 50mm or an 85 or 105mm. But what you also gain there is, in a lot of prime lenses, is greater apertures. They can open up from f2.8 to f1.8 to f1.4 to 1.2. So that way you're letting in a lot more light. We also call these faster lenses because while you're opening up your aperture to let more light, it means you can also increase your shutter speed to make it a little bit faster. Amazing results no matter what lens you're going to go for. You can save a little bit more money with going to a prime lens, but you're limited on the fact that you can't zoom. So if you're stuck for space, you have to then decide, do I need something wider? Do I need something closer? If you have a zoom lens, you have the option of zooming in and zooming out. But again, they can be quite dear. That's why I'm saying you don't necessarily have to go to branded. You can go to third party as well. See what I mean by there's an absolute plethora of lenses, but no matter what you go for, always make sure that it has a great maximum aperture. If you have followed along with my videos, you'll have seen that I've talked about one piece of equipment in particular that is very important to music photography, and that is earplugs. Camera, lenses, whatever is one thing, but your hearing is what you should be really looking out for overall. Get yourself a decent pair of earplugs. Now, you could always, if you're in a bit of a pickle, you could go to the likes of your chemist and pick up the little sort of foam earplugs for a couple of quid to go in your ear, or you can get much more higher end style earplugs like the D-Buds that I've reviewed in the past, which you can check it out in the top right hand corner there. If you have great quality earplugs, they will make sure that you're not going deaf, because if you're working in a photo pit, you're working quite close to loud pieces of equipment. Protect your hearing is what I'm saying. make sure that you have good quality, you know, don't skimp out on protection for your ears. I've had times where I've actually thought I have nearly gone deaf. In my younger days and all, I never worried about earplugs, and I paid the cost over years, because nowadays if I go to, even if I'm just attending a concert, I'm always wearing earplugs. So yeah, don't skip out on earplugs, you know, protect your hearing. Another thing that you don't want to skip out on in this field is memory cards. Don't have a slow memory card. Don't have an unreliably old memory card or anything like that. When I say a fast or an old memory card, we talk about things like the megabytes per second. We talk about the class. If you're shooting big bursts like on the A9 III where you're shooting 120 frames per second, you want to make sure your memory card can clear through all this data before you move on to your next burst of shots. The slower that memory card is going to be and the older that memory card is going to be, well, it's going to take forever to load up these photos onto the card. But if you have an old memory card, then it's going to have a higher chance of corrupting. So take, for example, I've been using these cards as of late. If the camera is going to autofocus, it's not, that's okay, I'll hold it up. I've been using these cards as of late. These are from Delkin. This is their Black Series. These are V90 Class 10 300 megabyte per second cards. 300 megabytes per second is probably the highest that you can get in an SD card. Yes, it's great looking out for the gigabytes, the size of the card, whether it's 64, 128, so on and so forth, but speed, class, all those different things matter. You also want to make sure it's a really good build card. Like, take for example, these cards don't have the little threads between the contacts, so they aren't going to break as easy on me, whereas cheaper cards will have that. Cheaper cards will also be a lot slower. Cheaper cards will also be a lot more unreliable. You're also finding now with other cameras, they're also bringing in CF Express, whether it's CF Express Type B or CF Express Type A on Sony cameras, where they can shoot at much more higher megabytes per second. So this can also apply to your continuous shooting. This can apply to video. The more megabytes per second you have, the more it can clear through the buffer, the more it can clear onto your memory card. So yeah, what I'm basically saying is, don't skimp out on memory cards. Yes, faster cards will be a lot more expensive. Like, these are generally about a couple of £100 a pop, but it's worth it in the long run, because that way, you know, your camera will clear through the shots. It means they won't have as corruptive a file, a higher chance of corrupted files. So yeah, don't skimp out on these guys. And that's really it. Yeah, I could sit here and talk about lots of other different things like flashes. Well, not necessarily flash, because in most gigs it's first 3 songs no flash, but I could also sit here and say, yeah, you know, have plenty of these, plenty of batteries, just have plenty of spares, spare memory cards, spare batteries, have a decent strap, all the silly stuff, you know, they're all important too. But the stuff that I have talked about with having a camera, having your lens, having your earplugs, having your memory cards, all play a big part in this field. And I hope running through this has been helpful for you, and I hope this hasn't put you into debt as to the type of gear that you're going to get. And you know what, at the end of the day, no matter what you use, you're going to get stellar results. There is no such thing as a bad camera, and I do truly hope this video was helpful for you guys. If it was, let me know in the comments down below. Let me know as well, what gear do you use too? And while you're there, don't be afraid to like, share, subscribe, hit that wee bell icon so you can stay up to date with future videos. But until then guys, happy shopping. I'm kidding. Do take care of yourselves and have a great day.